Okay, before we start, is there any questions about the material from last week? Okay. All right, so as you know, I've had a little trouble with the handwriting app, so I decided to try something different. So I'm going to try slides today. It's an experiment. If you hate it, let me know. And if you love it, you don't want me to go back to handwriting because all of a sudden now you can see things and understand it, then that's good as well. So the basic trade-off is the material will kind of go by faster because I'll write down less, but that's okay. I'm still going to pace myself according to whatever we did last year. And if you're keeping notes yourself, you also won't be able to keep that up. But obviously, I'm going to post the slides on the Moodle. And yeah, anyways, we'll see. I'll do it for a couple of weeks, and and then I'll reassess. All right, so for today, I just want to wrap up this whole TLS SSL attack tree, and then we'll move on to a different topic, which is called social engineering as well. Okay, this slide. Okay, so last class we were talking about you want to connect to a website. It's over HTTPS. You get the certificate back. There's a bunch of checks that you have to do. So you want to say, did the CA actually sign that certificate? Does that certificate have itself a chain that goes all the way back to a root certificate in my computer? Does the subject name match? So if the certificate is, so if I'm at Concordia.ca, then the certificate has to be for Concordia.ca, right? There's a field, which we talked about, that a certificate authority certificate has to have the CA flag set as true. When you're issued, if Concordia is issued a website, that flag should be set to false. If the CA messes up and accidentally sets it to true, then Concordia can be a CA now. They could turn around and issue certificates for whatever website, okay? But it's also important that you actually check that field, right? And so this is what it looks like in the certificate. And then expiration and revocation are two other things that we might want to do, okay? So a bunch of these things we talked about last class, so I'll skip over them, but you have them in slide form as well. So we talked about this go-to-fail error, which led to some unreachable code, and that code was what was doing the actual certificate steps, some of the checks. And so one thing you could do is you could use it to mismatch the domain. The solution for developers is, you can write better code. You can try some static analysis tools. The problem with the tools is you'll get a lot of false positives. Or the best thing you could do is do some unit testing. Fuzzing is one way where you just throw stuff, whether it's certificates or if it's just messages to the library, and see what happens. Okay, and then at the very end of last class, I also mentioned that there's this basic constraints field. So a CA certificate should have this set to true. A site certificate should have it set to false. And the problem was that a bunch of people weren't checking this field. Okay, so they were just ignoring it. It's kind of obscure. It's sort of buried in the middle of the certificate. So in 2002, there was a problem with Internet Explorer, and everyone said, we'll never do it again. It was a really stupid error. Now we all know we're going to check that field. Then it happened again about 10 years later in Apple iOS, and then more recently it's happened with a bunch of IoT devices. And so it seems to happen every time someone writes a stack from scratch, right? A brand new operating system, a brand new library, then this is something that tends to happen. Okay. All right, so then I'll tell you a few more stories about things that go wrong with those certificate checks. Okay, so one thing you might do is you might just say, you know what, I'm going to do something bad, and it's going to throw an error, and then whatever. We'll see. Is it so bad to actually just throw an error? So in 2011, there were some reports that came out of Syria, and the users were saying, you know what, I'm going to, the network structure is controlled by the government, by Syrian telecom, and I'm going to Facebook, and I'm getting this weird error because I'm getting this self-signed certificate, okay? So the certificate, you can't really see that well, but basically you can say it's for Facebook, and it's issued by the exact same domain that the site is for. So we call that a self-signed certificate. Presumably, this is not a CA, right? So there's no chain, there's no way to go back all the way to the CA. And because the domains match exactly, it was probably an automated attack. So there was a computer, it didn't know what Facebook was. It was just sitting there, and anytime the user asked for any URL, it would invent a certificate for it on the fly, send it back to the user, but just have it issued by itself. Okay? So this is going to throw an error, right? So what did errors look like in 2011? Okay, so this is Internet Explorer, and it would look something like this. Okay, there's a problem with the website security certificate. The security certificate presented by the website was not issued by a trusted certificate authority. Security certificate problems may indicate an attempt to fool you or intercept any data you want to send to the server. We recommend you close the website and do not continue to the website. Click here to close the page. Click here, or it doesn't say click here, but it says continue to this website, not recommended. And then there's a dialogue for more information, okay? Now, hopefully all of you understand that error message perfectly, right? Because we just spent 2 weeks talking about it, okay? Do you think that your relatives would understand this? The people who aren't doing a master's in engineering in security, right? Maybe not, right? It just looks kind of like garbly-goop. Certificates, trusted certificate authorities, we don't know any of that stuff, okay? Now, there's a really simple way to make this error go away. What is it? Continue. Boom. Okay, and then what happens if I click that? Message goes away, I go to Facebook, Facebook loads, it looks exactly the same, right? Everything, like there's nothing amiss. And I forget about it. 5 minutes later, I'm logged in and I'm reading my feed or whatever they call it, and that's it. Okay? Yeah. So the adversary, though, in the middle, right? They were able to inject this fake certificate, and so they're able to read everything. They're able to get your credentials, right? So they can even log in another time, and they're able to intercept all of the traffic. Okay? And so there were some academics that did a study. And now this is in a lab setting, so people are, they're maybe being extra cautious. But even in that setting, they found that for, a domain mismatch or an unknown CA, most people just click through the error, okay? Or they said they would. So they, this is a reminder. This is the survey they sent out first saying, would you do it or not? But then I think they actually tested it later and the rates were even higher. But the point is that at least half of the users were clicking through, okay? And that's fine. If you're a government and you want to intercept traffic, you don't need to intercept necessarily 100% of people, okay? If you can intercept 50%, that's still a big chunk of people for your surveillance or whatever you want to do. Now, we've tried to improve the warning screens. I shouldn't say we, but by we, I mean browser designers have put a lot of effort into this. They know it's a problem, okay? And so they've done sort of two things in order to try and decrease the number of people that just blindly click through, okay? So this was one proposal that was from people who worked at Google. They work on Chrome. It was implemented in some fashion. I don't know what today's looks like exactly, but this was their proposal. They did a user study on it, and they found it really helped. So first off, they really tried to simplify the message and remove all the jargon. okay? So there's nothing about certificates, there's nothing about certificate authorities or SSL or anything like that. It just says your connection isn't private and attackers might be trying to steal your information from this website. For example, passwords, messages, or credit cards. And there's no button to click through, okay? There's only back to safety, which will make you exit the website. Now there is an advanced tab, and if you click on the advanced tab, then it tries to give you a little more information that's a bit more technical. So it says the server could not prove that it was the website it is. Its certificates aren't trusted by your computer's operating system. This may be caused by misconfiguration, or it could be the attacker trying to intercept your connection, okay? And then you do have the option to click through, okay? So the idea is that if you knew what you were doing and you were able to read that advanced message and understand it, then you could click through, okay? Now maybe users over time, they see this enough, eventually they learn, hey, if I click advance and then I click through, then I can click through right away, okay? But anyway, so this did seem though to be much better. So today, what does it look like? There's actually a nice website you can all play with called badssl.com. And it's a bunch of websites that are basically misconfigured. And so you can see what it looks like to see things. So for example, let's say we go to a website that has a self-signed certificate. So this is what Safari shows. So it says, you can see it's very close actually to what Chrome has. It became kind of industry standard, the wording. This connection is not private. This website may be impersonating selfsigned.badssl.com to steal your personal or financial information. You should go back to the previous page, okay? And then I have a go back button. I don't have a click through button. I can go show details, right? Then it says Safari warns you when a website has a certificate that's not valid. This may happen if the website is misconfigured or if an attacker has compromised your connection. To learn more, you can view the certificate. If you understand the risks involved, you can visit the website, okay? And so then if I click on it, there's another warning. Are you sure you want to visit the website on a connection that is not private? And then I click it, and then I'm through, okay? So the error messages seem to be much better today, and you can play around with it. So there's all sorts of like things that should trigger errors, and you can see what the errors look like. And I think that's a pretty common error. So an expired certificate might look a little bit different. Yeah, so the base message is actually exactly the same. And then the show details has a little more information. So it also talks about how your clock might be wrong. So that's a weird side case where if your system clock is wrong, like say it's set to 5 years in the future, then a bunch of certificates that are actually valid today aren't valid as well. And so it has that as just sort of a troubleshooting tip. Okay, we'll come back to this when we talk later about, we're going to talk about usability and the idea of communicating messages to users and things like that. Okay, questions about this so far? Okay. All right, so here's another kind of weird issue. It's called the parsing error. So if you're looking at a certificate, your browser, you're looking at a certificate, there's a common name, which is the like www.google.com. Okay, so that's what the certificate's for. It's called common name in the certificate. Okay, and then you also are looking at a website. The user's currently trying to connect to concordia.ca. Okay, and so what you're going to do is you're going to compare those two strings. Okay, now before you can compare the strings, you have to do what's called parsing, which is just find that string in the certificate. So the certificate is some file, right? And so you have to say, okay, the name, the common name, it starts at this field, right, at this byte, and then it goes to this byte, and now it's over, kind of thing. Okay, so parsing sounds like really boring, and it seems like everyone's probably figured it out. But the honest truth is that parsing is really hard. It's easy in a lot of cases, but there's certain corner cases where it gets hard. And so having two different pieces of software that were written by two different people, maybe in two different programming languages, right? Getting them to behave consistently is hard, okay? So that they always parse exactly the same in all cases, all right? So here's an example. Let's say that we have a string that looks like this. So it's google.com. Then there's this character, a null character. Okay, so this is a special character. It's allowed. It's in Unicode or whatever. But it's not a character that you would normally use. Okay, and then .concordia.ca. Okay, so this is sort of a weird looking URL. So what would happen if you try and parse this string? So the answer is one of three things. Okay, so some code might look at that and say, we don't allow any special characters. I see a special character, I'm just going to ignore it. Okay, so it rejects the string completely. Another parser might say, okay, let's try and deal with it. So I don't recognize that character, that's fine. Let me drop that character out of the string, and then the rest of the characters I recognize, and so I'll just process the string without that character. Okay, so that would give me google.com.concordia.ca. Okay, then there's one other kind of weird corner case, which always arises because you're programming in C or C++ or some other language like that. So in languages like Java, when you have a string, you have a lot of like kind of instrumentation around the string, so the computer knows this is a string, I'm looking at it, I know how long it is, you know, I have all this kind of meta information about the variable. In C, it's sort of more bare metal, and so what they do is they use the null character to show the end of a string. So you start a string, you just say, start reading here, and keep going until you hit the null character, then you know the string is over. Okay, so that's how C works, whatever, so we call it null terminated. Okay, now if we read this string and we were treating it like a null terminated string, then we would read it up to google.com, we hit the null character, and now we're done. Okay, so that looks like google.com. Okay, now what is right and what's wrong actually doesn't matter. Okay, it doesn't matter, you can do any of these three. Where the problem arises is when some people do one and other people do the others. Okay, so when there's differences between how people do this, right? So let's think of an example. Let's say that I package up a certificate and I have this crazy string in it, and I send it off to the CA. And I say, okay, I want you to sign this certificate. And so the CA is like, great, I'm going to send an email to admin at, right, your domain, right? And then we'll see if you can answer that email or not, okay? And it's at that point that it pulls that string out of my request, right? And let's just assume for the fun of it that the CA is going to drop the null character, okay? So then where's the email going? The email is going to admin at google.com.concordia.ca, okay? Who owns that domain? Concordia, right? So the fact that it's got google.com before it, that's just a subdomain, right? You can make any subdomain you want. It has nothing to do with Google at all. It's a subdomain of Concordia, okay? So Concordia could receive that email, right? Okay, so that's fine. So they receive the email, they reply with the challenge, and the CA is like, great, and it signs off on the certificate. So now they have a certificate that has this weird string in it, and it's signed by CA, and it traces all the way back to a root certificate. Okay? Then they go out and they see a user that's going to Google, and they're using some browser that was written in C. Okay? And even though they're going to Google and we have a certificate for google.com.concordia.ca, we decide let's just drop it in the connection and see what happens. Okay? So we drop it in. So the user now receives it. And so they're like, okay, I'm trying to go to google.com. I have the certificate. Let me see what the certificate's common name is. So they go into it, and that's the point where they parse it. And because it's null terminated, they go up to google.com, they hit the null character, and then they stop. Okay? So the browser's like, oh, this is a valid certificate for google.com. All right? And then they let it through. All right? So effectively, you got a Google certificate because you exploited the fact that there's mismatches between the parsing of the CA and the parsing of the browser. Okay, and so there was a time period when these kinds of attacks were possible. Some people gave talks at Black Hat and other places about this type of thing, and then it all kind of got fixed. Okay, so this isn't all these attacks I show you are historic attacks that don't work. But anyways. Okay, another topic is revocation. Okay, so let's say that the user's going to a website and they get a certificate back, and let's say that the adversary has stolen that key somehow. Okay, so it's not as hard as you would think to steal an SSL key off a server for a couple reasons. Well, one main reason. One reason is that the server, it can't like lock that key up, put it in a safe, and pull it out of cold storage once a year. Okay, because it needs it in order to actually make these connections. Okay, it needs to know the key. It has to have that key in RAM all the time because it's constantly, every time it's making a connection, it's using this key to issue a digital signature. Okay, so it has to be on the server. Okay, you breach the server however you want. Heartbleed was one that we saw, but it could be any exploit that you want to do. You're going to find the key. The key's in RAM. It's sitting there. Okay. All right, so let's say that the adversary steals it and somehow Concordia figures it out. Okay, what should they do? Say it louder. Okay, so we want to cancel the certificate, right? So first off, it's not enough to just get a new certificate. Okay, Concordia can be like, okay, I'm going to go get a new certificate. That's fine. But then what the adversary will do is they'll see you connecting and Concordia is sending their new certificate. They'll just replace it with the old certificate. Okay, the old certificate's still valid. Now this is why certificates have expiration dates. Okay, so this attack has a shelf life, right? Because that certificate will eventually expire. Okay, but the shelf life of this attack is still like 1 year or 2 years or something like that. Okay, so that's a pretty long time, to sit around, waiting for something to expire. You don't want an attack that's going to last 2 years. Okay, so what we need is a way to explicitly cancel the certificate. Okay.
Issuing a new certificate takes time.
That too, yeah. So getting a new certificate. Well, actually, if you use the DV process, that was the whole point. So when you do the email to admin at domain.ca, the whole point was that you could actually do that in 5 minutes if you wanted to. Yeah. So an EV certificate takes a long time. It takes many days, but getting a new DV certificate should actually be like more or less instant. Okay. So how do we, so we need a way to revoke a certificate. Revoke is just a fancy way of saying cancel. Okay. So revocation is hard. I mean, once you've signed something and it's out there, right, there's not much you can do, right? Like it's already signed. You can't go out and take it back. You can't go and take your signature off it. You could change your key, but then if nobody's looking at your key, or the adversary keeps telling them your old key, right? The point is the adversary can always send the old information. So something that was valid at a certain point in time, the adversary can keep thinking you're in that period of time, basically, okay? So it turns out that there's really no way to do revocation without having to check with another party, okay? So we need a third party here that is going to maintain a list of certificates that have been revoked, okay? So there's a couple ways that you can do this. The most common way is called a status check. And so basically you go and you're gonna ask somebody every single time you see a certificate, okay, I checked the certificate out, it's valid from my perspective. The only thing I don't know is whether it's canceled or not. So can you tell me whether it's canceled? And then the server will say yes or no. Okay, so we call this OCSP. And the question is, okay, who are you going to ask? Who's the person that has all this revocation information? And the answer is it's going to be in the certificate itself. So when you go to a certificate and you look inside of it, you will find the name of a server that's being designated in order to do this on behalf of it. And it's always the CA that issued the certificate. So it's some server that the CA puts up. Okay, so I'll show you in real life. So if we go to Moodle, we go show certificate. You can see that it's issued by Global Sign. And then if we go into the details of the certificate, you'll see there's an extension that's not I mean, Safari doesn't do a great job. It just gives it a number. But anyway, this extension is for OCSP responders, okay? And so GlobalSign has their own URL that they threw up that handles this revocation, which is what's sitting here. Yeah, so every authority would have its own server. Okay, anyone think of anything that might go wrong with this? Okay, so there's two main issues with this, okay? The first one is, let's say you're a CA and congratulations, you're very successful as a CA. You got like the biggest websites on the planet. They're all coming to you because you're going to be their CA. So Google, Facebook, Twitter, they all want you to be the CA. Okay, so that's great. Now, what happens if, if you're their CA, then you have to do this status check. Okay, so you throw up your server. Okay, now let's say 1 million people go to Google in a second. How many people are hitting your server? 1 million in a second, more or less, right? Now, maybe they've already been to the website, so they've cached the certificate or something like that. But basically, you're going to get hammered, okay? Then add in Facebook traffic, and then add in Twitter traffic, okay? And so every CA has this problem where it's not just their biggest site, it's like every single site they've ever issued a certificate for. Every time someone goes to that website and gets that certificate for the first time, they're hitting the CA server, okay? So this isn't some casual, sort of, I'll throw a server up and every now and then people are going to ask about these certificates. No, it's getting like smoked. Like it's everyone's asking all the time, okay? So this has to be heavy infrastructure, all right? So when the CAs rolled this out originally, they weren't prepared for that. They didn't have the infrastructure. And then as websites got bigger and bigger and bigger, they upgraded their infrastructures, but the CAs didn't they didn't keep up, okay? And so essentially what would happen is you would go here, you would ask the CA, and you wouldn't hear anything, okay? So then browsers are sitting there thinking, okay, what are we going to do? We could wait, right? We could enforce this property, but then our users are like complaining because it's always hanging. You load a website and it's hanging there waiting for these things, right? So users don't want that. And so eventually the solution was, okay, we're going to actually fail open. So fail open means we'll send the thing along. Okay, we'll send the status check. So we'll do it. But if we don't hear back within a certain period of time, then we're just going to assume that everything was okay. All right. Okay, so this became the norm for it. All right. Now let's say you have an adversary. The adversary is in the middle of your connection, right? So they already dropped in their fake certificate or their old certificate that was stolen, right? And then now you're doing the status check, right? So they see that message go by. What are they going to do?
They're going to drop it.
They're just going to drop it, right? You ask the CA, is this still valid? The CA says, nope, it's not valid. And the adversary just drops it. Okay, so that's simple. Now, a second thing is if you squint closely at this URL, what protocol does it go over? Okay. So that's weird, right? Like, okay, what's the problem? First off, what's the problem with sending this over HTTP? Okay, so the adversary's in the middle, right? They're using their old certificate. They see the response come back over HTTP. It says, no, that certificate's not valid. What are they going to do? They could drop it, or what else could they do? They could change it. They could flip the no to a yes. Okay? So even if the infrastructure picked up, and all of a sudden we had lots of OCSP, and it has picked up now. So browsers have gotten more strict, and they have this project called Certificate Transparency. And one of the requirements is that we're going to stress test your server, and if it's not up to par, then we're not going to let you in and things like that. So they are becoming more strict for EV certificates, not necessarily for DV certificates. So even if that first issue gets fixed, we still have this second problem that it's going over HTTPS. Okay? Can anyone think about why Why don't we just send this over HTTPS? Then the problem's solved. Okay, so this is really weird and bizarre, but I'll explain it to you. Okay, so what happens is I go to Concordia and I say I want to talk HTTPS. Okay, and Concordia says, fine, here's my certificate. All right, so I'm looking at the certificate and I'm like, okay, is this thing revoked or not? All right, so then I go over to globalsign.com and let's say it's over HTTPS. So I say, okay, I need to get this response. So the first thing I have to do is I have to open that HTTPS connection to GlobalSign. Then I can get the response. Okay. So I say, hi, I want to talk HTTPS to you. And they say, great, here's my certificate. Right? So now I'm holding a second certificate. And then I'm saying, okay, is this thing revoked or not? So then I go look in the certificate and I find another OCSP server that's on HTTPS. And so I have to first connect to it before I can ask it. So I say, hi, I want to talk HTTPS. It sends me a certificate, and then I'm like, is this revoked? And so I end up in a continual circle, okay? So I basically can't get out of it. So that's why we have the circular dependency. That's why we can't just make it HTTPS, okay? So instead, it's HTTP, and then the adversary can always switch the response. So you ask if it's valid, and the adversary sitting there, the CA says, no, actually, that's a revoked certificate. And the adversary can either just drop it, right? Or they could switch the yes to a no. So either of them work, all right? So basically, revocation is kind of broken. It doesn't work against the threat model that we have. So if an adversary can steal a certificate and then be in a man-in-the-middle position to use it, then adding revocation on top probably isn't going to do much. If they're also in the middle of that revocation check, then yeah. Okay, now there are a few other ways you can go about revocation. So the other one that's the most common is called certificate revocation list. So it's more or less the same thing. A CA just says, here's all my revoked certificates, okay? And what your browser will do is it will go around to the CA. So instead of you going and asking real time where the adversary is, your browser is going to go in the background, like Google, the company, they'll go around to a bunch of CAs, say, give me all your lists. They'll package it all up into a list, they call it the CRL set, and then they'll push it to you into Chrome, probably using some sort of secure connection, okay, using some HTTPS. And they're able to do that because the keys will be pinned in Chrome, meaning they're not actually relying on CAs in order to do that, okay? The only problem with this approach is, at least, like, this is 10 years old now in 2014, so I don't know currently. But one researcher, Steve Gibson, went around and tried to find all the CAs and then looked and saw how many are actually in the set of CAs that Google is trying to get. And they found that like 75% or 85% were missing, depending on which operating system you were on. Okay, so anyway, so it wasn't giving good coverage. And then Google wrote a blog post like explaining why. And it was basically because the CAs weren't giving the information in a friendly enough way for Google to automatically collect it. And so maybe this has changed. It'd be interesting to see it. Maybe someone in a project might look at that question. The other thing that makes a lot of sense, it's probably actually the best solution, is instead of, you still do the OCSP thing, okay? But instead of every user going to the CA and asking, what the website will do is they'll go themselves. So Google will go, say, once a day. They'll go to the CA and they'll say, give me an OCSP response and sign it, okay? And every time a user asks me for a certificate, I'll just throw it in. I'm giving them a bunch of certificates anyway, so I'll just throw in this thing, this like kind of ticket that basically says this thing is valid. Then the user doesn't have to go to the CA. So instead of 1 million users hitting the CA, Google just hits it once and then they can distribute it to all of the users, okay? The only problem with this is that there wasn't like a field for it in the protocol, okay? So you'd have to sort of abuse the protocol to find somewhere to stick it, and then apparently there were a few, like some backbone servers that would drop packets that had these in it because it looked invalid. So it kind of never got off the shelf. And once again, I don't know today, maybe these issues have been fixed. I'm not sure, but at least about, in the 2010s, like kind of thing, this was considered, everyone loved this idea. They thought this was the best solution of the bunch, but it wouldn't work with some of the backbone infrastructure, and you just can't have websites that fail unpredictably, like people don't like that. And so, yeah. Okay, but anyways, at the end of the day, the moral of the story is revocation basically doesn't work. Okay, so if you can steal a certificate, you're still in that man in the middle position. Revocation's probably not going to fix anything. Okay, here's another website. So this is the way the web, so the web does not work this way if you go to Concordia, the way I'm going to describe it, but it's the way that the web worked about 10 years ago, and I actually want to explain why it changed. Okay, so what was very common is you would go to a website and the base page, the first page you landed on would be on HTTP, okay? And the thinking in the website was, well, until you put your username and password and stuff in, we don't need SSL, right? SSL is like for protecting it. So if you were to click that sign in button in the top right corner, what we do is we would switch you over to SSL at that point, okay? Because this is sort of a sensitive task. And a more common thing, which I spent a bit of time trying to find an example, but most websites have changed, is you might actually have the username and password fields right on that root screen, right? So it would say, put your username, put your password, there'd be a submit button. And when you press the submit button, it would actually go over SSL, okay? So it would redirect to SSL, and so your password was safe, okay? So it wasn't a security vulnerability in order to set the website up like this, okay? And so everyone thought that was fine, right? It was good, okay? Now here's the problem with doing it that way. First off, how do you actually know whether if I click on that, it's going to redirect to SSL or not?
See the URL.
Okay. Okay. Okay, let me take them one at a time. Okay. First off, if I click on it, then I can see. Now, let's say it is username, password, and there's a submit button, right? If I click on it and then it doesn't go to SSL, I'm screwed, right? Like, too late, okay? So let's say it's more like that. Let's say there's a username and a password. The current website is on HTTP, but that submit button probably is wired to send the password over HTTPS, okay? Is it technically feasible? If I'm a computer genius, could I figure out whether that will go over SSL or not? Or is it just impossible to know until you hit it?
Use some scripts.
Okay, and what would the scripts look at? Okay. So if it redirects, where is that information about whether it should redirect or not? Okay. So it's in the code of that website. That website is written in HTML. There is a submit button somewhere in that HTML, and that code will tell when the user presses this button, this is where you're going with that information. Okay. So you can right-click and go inspect element, and if we find it, we'll see. Okay, there is this button here, and indeed, when I click on the button, it's going to go over an HTTPS kind of link. Okay. All right, so it is technically feasible in order to figure it out. Now, would an average user be able to do that? No, of course not. Okay. Okay, so what people said is, well, let's say we have a website like this. Here's what the adversary will do. They'll just sit in the middle, and they'll see the user requests the website, okay? And then they're seeing the website coming back down. And all they'll do is they'll go through the HTML, and every time they see HTTPS:// they'll just replace it with HTTP://. Okay? So we call this SSL stripping. Okay? So they just strip out all of it. Then they send it down to the user. Okay? And there's a tool that automates this called SSL strip. All right? So that's all you do. It's really simple. The computer's dumb. It doesn't know you're going to Facebook or Concordia. It doesn't know anything. It just automatically does it. And so then when the user clicks the submit button, it goes over HTTP. then the adversary's in the middle, so they grab the password. Then they can switch to HTTPS if they want and forward it on. So Concordia doesn't necessarily know. They're not like, oh, it's weird, this user keeps talking to me over HTTP, right? The adversary in the middle can swap it out. All right, and so the user won't know, or maybe they'll be like, after they click the submit button, because it doesn't redirect to HTTPS, they might think, oh, something was weird, but now it's too late, right? The password's gone. Okay, so the moral of the story is, once you're on HTTP, the adversary can keep you there. Okay, they can stop you from ever going to HTTPS. Once you're on HTTPS, though, then that index.html is protected by SSL. It has message integrity. So what that means is the adversary can't switch it. Or if they do switch it, you'll be able to detect it, and you'll say, okay, I'm rejecting that because it was switched. Okay, so that's why HTTPS doesn't just give you confidentiality, it also gives you integrity over that message. Okay, so the adversary can't play games like this. So once you get on HTTPS, then you're actually seeing the websites as they were being sent by the server. Now the server can still try and trick you or whatever, but we're not assuming that the server is malicious in this case. Okay, so now the common best practice is, if you use HTTPS anywhere on your site, you should actually use it everywhere, okay? So when users land, so if you go to concordia.ca, you're not logged in or anything, you're already on HTTPS automatically, okay? And if I search Google for Concordia, Google knows that it wants to send me to the HTTPS, right? So like this is how you basically stay on HTTPS, is I would go up to my search bar, I'd be like, I want to find Concordia University. And Safari knows Google's an HTTPS website. Okay, so Safari is not going to try HTTP and then Google's going to say, oh no, talk to me over HTTPS, and a redirect happens. That's not even going to happen. Okay, so as soon as I hit enter, it's like it's already going straight over HTTPS. And once you say, hello, I want to speak HTTPS, there's nothing the adversary in the middle can do. Okay, they can't. They can switch it, so they can say just a normal hello, I want to speak HTTP, but then the server response is going to be the same, right? And the user's browser is expecting an HTTPS response. Okay, so basically the adversary at a certain point, they won't be able to fake the information anymore. Okay, the browser isn't going to accept an HTTP response, right? So the server is going to have to play, or sorry, the adversary is going to have to play the role of the server doing HTTPS. Okay, and then eventually there's going to be a certificate involved, and the adversary doesn't know the private key of the certificate, and they're going to get locked out of the conversation. Okay, so anyways, and then Google, as you see, they indexed the HTTPS version of Concordia, right? So then I click on it. So I'm already going to HTTPS. I'm asking for HTTPS. Of course, it comes to me over HTTPS. And, I click on sign in, and that's redirects me to a different domain, but over HTTPS. So I never left HTTPS right through that whole process. Okay, so that's what we want for websites. And even if you go to like news websites now, say you go to CBC, in that case, I did ask for HTTP first because I didn't go through Google. But anyways, you can see that even like a news website like this, where there's probably some way to log in and some reason that you might want to log in. But even websites that don't obviously necessarily want you to log in or will just go over SSL now. Okay, questions about that part? Okay, another kind of weird attack is what we call a picture-in-picture attack. This is also very old, as you can tell by the graphic. But this is sort of what would happen actually on a lot of websites, is you go to a website and let's say you wanted to send money or something like that. They would be like, okay, we're going to redirect you to PayPal. But then it would come in what's called a pop-up window. Okay, so it would open a whole new window. All this stuff that's sort of around this, like the title bar and the address bar and the box that the browser's in, we call that Chrome. Okay, so that's where Google Chrome got the name from, but that's called the Chrome of the browser. Okay, So the website is the stuff that's, in the actual website, but all that extra stuff around, the close button, the minimize, the maximize, that's put there by the operating system or by the browser itself. It's part of the software of the browser. It's called the Chrome. Okay. Now what's going on in this attack is that inner window is actually a website. It's part of the content of the website. It is not its own window. Okay. So this window is just something, because the website can display whatever it wants to the user, it's displaying something that looks like a window, but actually isn't, okay? And even if you clicked on it and dragged it around, or if you clicked in the address bar, it could put a cursor, right? The one thing it couldn't do is you couldn't drag it. If you tried to drag it outside of the outer window, right, then it wouldn't be able to do that because it is actually part of the website itself, okay? But other than that, it just looks like a traditional pop-up, okay? So if the adversary can lure you to their website, and then they can make a pop-up that looks legitimate, it has the lock. They could even, if you click the lock, simulate a kind of certificate lookup website, whatever it is. Then it looks like that pop-up is actually for PayPal or Facebook or whatever website it is. Okay, so once again, this doesn't really work that well today. The reason it doesn't work is because browsers said, we're not doing pop-ups, they're too dangerous. So now we're gonna use tabs instead. So if you open something, it opens in a new tab. And then because it's moving over in a new tab, then you can't, it's not like you have a window on top of a window. Okay, so you can't do this picture in a picture thing. Now error messages do still pop up. Okay, so that is the one thing. And so now you see a bunch of you'll go to a website and there'll be a fake error message. It looks like the operating system is warning you about something, but really it's the website itself. The website has that as a picture in the website or whatever, and it uses JavaScript to pop it up and let you drag it around and things like that. Once again, if you tried to drag it outside of the Chrome of the browser, then it wouldn't work. Okay, and when you click it, you click OK or whatever, then it's then it's a website action. Okay, so it's doing something on the website. Okay, another thing you could do is you could put something underneath it. So when you click OK, it clicks through to something else. So we'll talk about that at the very end of the course. That's called clickjacking, and that's another attack. But
so, sorry.
Yeah.
If we disable the pop-up on the browser, it's gonna, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, so even with pop-ups, they'll still pop up in a new tab. So pop-ups are annoying, because a website could spawn 100 of them, right? Yeah. So browsers don't like pop-ups for that reason. But the literal definition of a pop-up is that it's a smaller window that's on top of the current window.
Like McAfee, for example, antivirus of McAfee is warning you that your system is under compromise, but it's not.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. So the Chrome, the picture-in-picture could also be a different application that's on your computer, like the antivirus or something like that. Yeah.
But whenever we disable the notification of the Chrome, it's gonna disappear and never come again.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So if it's in the content of the website, once you close the website, it's gone.
Yeah.
It's not like it infected you or anything like that. Yeah. But do novice users know that? Not necessarily. Right. Okay. So just to wrap up the attack tree then, we can sort of put this in the attack tree. So let me zoom in a bit on the kind of section of the tree we've been talking about. Okay, it didn't work the way I hoped it worked. Let me pull up the original PDF so we can. Yep. Yes, yeah, it is. Yeah, so there will be a video of this, and so you can follow along. Okay, so way back, like 4 lectures ago, we said that there were 3 ways basically to break crypto or break the tunnel. You could try and break into it, which is basically stealing a key. You could see what you could see from the outside of the tunnel. And then we were talking about how you'd subvert server authentication. So you would get the tunnel to end at you, even though you're the adversary, right? And so one way is if you can get a valid certificate somehow, then that works, okay? So it could be hacking a CA. It could be messing around with like when they try and email you things. It could be an in-person attack. If you're a government, you might try and legally compel the certificate. This part we didn't talk about. Another thing you can do is you can just use a bad certificate. So we saw that today. So you can just tolerate the error, right? Or maybe there's some software error, right? So because of go-to-fail or the basic constraints not being checked, or because of parsing differences between the browser or CA, there's some error that allows you to use a certificate that you shouldn't be able to use. If you're able to steal a key, you can still use a revoke certificate. You just drop the response, it will fail open, or you change it. And then you could also just not use a certificate, either by stripping, so making sure that people don't land on HTTPS ever, or the kind of picture-in-picture thing that we just talked about. Okay. Now, the nice thing about putting this in a tree is you can see like certain patterns. Like I want to subvert server authentication. I can use a valid certificate, invalid certificate, revoke certificate, no certificate. And so that structure, seeing those side by side, you might think, okay, is there another category of certificates that I might use, right? And so this is why attack trees are useful, because they let you see maybe attacks that you didn't see originally. Other things that are useful is that they kind of tell a story. So if you want to know, like, I want to break HTTPS, so I'm going to get the tunnel pointed at me. I want to get a valid certificate, but I can't because I'm not the actual website. So somehow I'm going to subvert the issuance process, and there's this email process. So if I can just break the MX record in the DNS server, if I can change it to my own MX record for the site that I want to impersonate, then boom, it's done, right? Then you can go all the way back, and then now you have a certificate for that website, and you can drop it in, okay? So attack trees are also a nice way of presenting information to someone that might want to read it, okay? So whether you're writing a paper or doing a report or something like that for your employer, attack trees are useful in that sense as well. So this was meant to give you a very in-depth example of attack trees. You still needed the domain knowledge. That's why it took us so long to get through, because you can't really come up with the attacks unless if you know what's happening underneath. And so that's going to apply in the real world as well. If you try and do an attack tree for something, you're going to have to know how that thing works. It's not a methodology where you can just do it without understanding how the thing works. The nice thing too is it's a way to put together non-technical attacks and technical attacks, right? So we had very technical attacks like the Beast attack on the cryptography that's used in HTTPS, right? Very, very, very technical. And then we have things like, oh, you just pretend to be, you're an ex-employee of Microsoft, you pretend you're still there and ask for a certificate, right? Or you're a government, you just go over to a company and say, give me your private key, okay? So all of those attacks, they all belong together. They're all ways that the adversary might use, right? And honestly, the adversary probably prefers some non-technical way of doing it if they can do it. And so anyways, it's a nice methodology because it's not just a technical methodology, right? You can do whatever you want in it. That structure can help you see if there's new categories of attack or get you thinking about related attacks. And then you get a story when you go from the root to the leaf in a tree. Okay, so that's it for attack trees. It's it for HTTPS. So I'll pause for any final questions you might have. Otherwise, we're going to talk about something completely different. Okay, good. Okay, so the next topic I want to talk about is social engineering, okay? And we'll spend 2 lectures, the rest of this lecture and next lecture on it. Okay, so social engineering. Why are we looking at social engineering? First off, what is it? So social engineering is basically, it's still an attack. The adversary wants to do something, but there's a human that, whether it's explicit, like whether they realize it or not, sometimes it's just implicit, there's a human that's trying to screen access. Okay, so the attacker can't just go and do what they want, but if they can compromise a human, right, then they can get actually what they want. Okay, and so that process is called social engineering. And the reason I bring it up in this course is, A, it's not really covered in any of the other courses, okay? So it's one of those weird topics, so I'm trying to cover it. And secondly, despite it not being covered, it actually is one of the most prevalent ways that attackers do attacks today, okay? And it doesn't have to be strictly a pure social engineering attack. Often it's a kind of hybrid attack. So I'll tell you some stories later where you'll see lots of examples of kind of doing some social engineering and also doing some technical attacks and kind of mixing them together, okay? The other thing that makes social engineering interesting for this course specifically, because it's about evaluation methodologies, is let's say you're a company and you want to say, I'm secure. Well, first off, let's say you have a network and you want to be like, I'm secure, okay? There's tools and software and there's different methodologies you can use, and you can probably make pretty good sense of whether you're secure or not, okay? Now, if you have a bunch of customer information and people can call you up on the phone and ask you things and change their account details and things like that, and you want to know whether you're secure or not, that's a lot harder problem, right? You can't throw software at it. You can't throw math at it. It's based on, you know, what is the person feeling that day? You know, do they think the person calling them is actually the person that they're saying they are? You know, there's a lot of intangibles there, okay? So it's harder to come up with a methodology that works for things like social engineering. So what we're going to do is, because I can't give you a methodology, I'm going to at least give you a framework. So we'll sort of distill social engineering attacks down into 3 or 4 categories where you can think at least of the components of the attacks, and then it can help you, just like an attack tree, you can think of new attacks or variations on the attacks, and you can think about how you're going to prevent these attacks, okay? You can get a job in social engineering. So like penetration testers will do social engineering as well. Companies will hire people to test out their company. If you do find yourself in that job, there are issues that you should be aware of, like legal issues. For example, if you impersonate a police officer, that's a crime, period. It doesn't matter if you're doing it for fun or you're doing it because you were hired, you know, to social engineer a company. And then there's also ethical issues as well. So like if you find that like say there's somebody that has really bad hygiene when it comes to their computer, like digital hygiene, not literal hygiene. So they're downloading all sorts of things and stuff like that, and you exploit it and then they get fired, right? That's sort of on you, right? So you have to think a little bit too. I'm not saying that they don't deserve to be fired, but maybe they should be disciplined or sent to a workshop instead or things like that. But you have to think about what the ground rules are before you go into an organization and start doing this type of thing. Okay, so I'll give you just a bunch of examples of social engineering so you can sort of get a feel for it. Then I'll give you the framework. We'll go through it. And then I'll give you some bigger examples at the end. So one example that we already saw, I mentioned it even earlier in this class, is there was an example of someone that got fired from Microsoft, but they still had their like employee badge and things like that. So they went over to a CA and said, I work at Microsoft, give me a certificate for code signing. And the CA said, fine, everything checks out. Okay, so that's technically social engineering because they're not an employee of Microsoft, they're impersonating one. It might be that you want access to a server room at a company. And so what you do is you pretend to be IT staff. So you show up with the uniform. A lot of companies will hire external companies, right? And so you might watch the organization for a while. You'll see the vans coming and going. So you'll figure out who it is that does the IT support. And then you'll show up in the same van with the same uniform, the same badge, whatever. You'll have all your gear on your belt or whatever, and you'll look like an IT person. And you'll have some reason, right, that you'll concoct for why you need access to the server room. And then there's going to be someone there that's either going to let you in or not, right, security person. And so, yeah, so that comes down to how well you impersonate it. Another attack are called road apples. So road apples is this. What is this? So it's a thumb drive, USB thumb drive. Okay. So the idea of this attack is you just go in the parking lot of a company and you leave a couple lying around. Okay. What's going to happen? Okay. Someone's going to pick it up and they're going to say, oh, someone lost this. Maybe I can give it back to the person who lost it. Right. So they go into their work. They go into their work computer. Right. They sit down. They plug it in. Right. And then what goes wrong? Okay. So if you have the right kind of malware on it and the operating system is vulnerable, then it could basically root that computer and give remote access to that computer to whoever dropped this. So this is actually how there was one of the most famous pieces of malware is called Stuxnet. So Stuxnet was nation-state level malware. It's thought to be designed by the U.S. government and the Israeli government. It was targeting uranium enrichment plant in Iran, and the allegation was that they were using it to build nuclear weapons. Iran said we're just using it for energy. Now the problem with this is they had tight security and all their computers were air-gapped. So air-gapped means that there's no internet connection. Okay, so there's literally no way in order to, from the outside to breach into that network because it's not connected. Okay, you need, if you want to get malware on that network, you need to physically cross over the air gap and have someone take your malware across it and put it on the machine. Okay, so we don't know how they accomplished it. We do know they did accomplish it. Okay, and the malware was very subtle and it just sort of slowly like increased the speeds and things, but then it made all the monitors spoofed and then it ended up breaking. Yeah. But anyways, when the malware was found eventually, so there was two, Stuxnet was like the final version, and then there was an earlier version called Flame, and there's evidence that it was written by the same people. There was a lot of things about USB transfers. Okay, so the malware had a bunch of stuff that was about, it had a 0 day so that if you could plug this into the right kind of operating system, then malware would move from the thumb drive. Okay. So we don't know if it was exactly as simple as just like leaving them in the parking lot or what it was. If it was getting someone USB stick that worked there at home and then putting the malware on or something like that. But it seems that the evidence suggests that USB sticks were used to carry that malware into that facility. As soon as you call, you get a human that's on the other end of the line. So lots of websites and servers and companies will have human customer service, right? And so if you're locked out of your account, they may have the authority to reset your password, okay? But you have to convince them that you are who you say you are. And that can be a lot easier human to human, especially when the social engineer is very well trained at what they're doing. And once again, I'll show you an actual video of that happening probably next class. Malicious emails are another big path for social engineering. So you could have malware in the attachment to the email or a link that links to a website that's malicious. It could also be that the email itself, just the content of the email, it's some sort of fraud. You're trying to get the person to do something. There's one type of email that's called spear phishing, which is basically like there's some thought that went into it. So it's not your generic phishing email that's just sort of like dear sir/madam, or whatever. It's like they know who you are. The email looks like it comes from someone you know. They CC in 3 people who are the 3 people that would normally like be in an email chain with you. And then there's an attachment and it's a PDF or something like that. And it looks pretty benign. And the name of the PDF is like something that you might actually look at, and then you click on it and it's done. And so, so spear phishing is a lot harder, but it requires a lot of research, right? So it's not, you have to be the target of the attack before you're going to get one of these things. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll sort of sketch out a little framework for it, and then we'll think about how the attacks sort of fit into these categories, okay? So most attacks have 3 phases, and this comes from the textbook, which you don't have to read. I distilled it down into a lecture for you. The textbook's actually kind of weird because he goes into all this like kind of crank psychology stuff that most people have discredited. But anyways, it's also interesting too, and you'll see him in a video in a second. But anyways, here's my distillation of the framework, like removing all the garbage. There's information gathering. Okay, so in order to do an attack, you have to know like sort of what you're doing. You're not just going to walk in and do it cold. Okay, and the more information you gather about what you're doing, then the more convincing your attack could be. The next is what we call pretexting, which is a fancy word for I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. Okay, so I'm impersonating someone. You could call it spoofing in Stride. So that's your pretext. And then the last thing is, what do you actually want to get out of it? Okay, and usually there's one of two things. Either you want to convince someone to do something that they don't want to do, so we call that persuasion, or you want to get a piece of information that they know that you shouldn't know, but you want to get it out of them anyways, okay? So we call that elicitation. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and during the break, I want you to think, not just socialize. I'm going to challenge you to come up with a social engineering attack. You can use any of those components that we just saw. And you're going to go somewhere, you're going to have a target, and I want you to get from the target that person's banking card, say their debit card. Okay, so that's not so hard. I mean, you could just steal it, probably. But I want the PIN as well. Okay, so your challenge is, how would you do an attack where you're not just going to get the card, the physical card, but you're actually going to get the PIN. The person is not going to be suspicious of you after the attack. Okay, they won't know that the PIN is gone or it's in the wrong hands. And no violence or coercion or anything like that as well. Okay, so take 10 minutes, think about how you would do it, and then I'll show you a video of one way that you could do it.
So we need to get the physical kind of number.
Yeah, so the physical card or a digital, like all the information about it, either's fine. We'll get started again. Okay, so hopefully you put some thought into your attack, and I'll show you one way to do it, and you can think after about how clever you were or not relative to it.
Yeah, we need team.
You what?
All of us, we need team cards.
Yeah.
So we can do it.
Exactly. It's unethical to repeat this attack. But. Okay, so this is from a TV show. It's kind of cheesy, but anyways, it actually is the attack itself is clever, and one of the people that's involved in the attack is the person who wrote the textbook So that was a fun attack, but let's do the boring academic thing now, and we'll distill that attack down into the framework. We'll see how well the framework works on it, okay? So remember, we have kind of like 3-4 things. So there's information gathering, pretexting, influence, which could either be persuasion or elicitation. So what was the information gathering in this attack?
We just want to.
Okay, so what bank they were using, what else?
They were using the information about Barclays and they were targeting the person who was,
Okay. So anytime you have a pretext, you do have to know something about your pretext. Like you have to know the name of a bank, how it works, all of that type of stuff. And you don't know that until you gather information about it. Okay? So that's definitely one piece of information. Is there anything else? Just say it loud. Okay, that's something that you'll get. So that will fall in later in the framework.
trust of the user.
Okay, so that will come more in the influence part. But what about just raw information? So there isn't a lot. So I'm not fishing for anything in particular. So this one is more about the pretext and the influence. But one thing is you do want to think about the location of the attack. Okay, so they obviously did some research. They thought that a food court would be a good place to do it. And then when you're in the food court, you have to find a target. And so, someone that has a handbag or a wallet or a knapsack or something like that is alone at least temporarily. And then you can distract them with the picture request. Okay. And then all the research that goes into the pretext as well. Okay. So these are the sort of the information gathering. And there's a typo. Sorry, it should be destructible. Okay, what about the pretext? Was there any pretext? So pretexting is pretending to be someone that you're not.
Paul was pretexting, he was pretending to be someone from Barclays, and he was contacting someone who's not from Barclays to make the victim give the information.
Okay, so there's actually more than one pretext in this attack. So the Okay, so there's the guy who made the call, the bank employee. There's the guy who received the call, right? Anyone else?
They pretend to be tourists and.
Okay, so the tourists, that's also a pretext. And the automated system, you could think of whether it's the same or the separate as the other one, but there's 3 or 4 pretexts. So the tourists, the main thing is that it was like, there would be a way to approach someone in a way that they might feel that they're targeted. But in this case, it was very spontaneous. They just happened to be at the next table. They were kind of having a conversation beside the person. The person was sitting there alone. They were probably listening to the conversation even though they weren't paying attention. So they kind of knew that the question was coming and there wasn't anything surprising about it. It's not that unusual that maybe someone asks you for a picture, right? And so everything kind of fit all right, okay? And then that was enough to get her back turned and so you could steal it. Then there's the Paul guy, so the bank employee. So he kind of looked like a banker, I guess. I don't know what bankers look like, but he had a suit on. He had the briefcase. He was on his phone actually before, like he was sort of like talking to her, like while he was actually on the phone. He had a lot of confidence and knowledge, right? He knew right away what to do. One thing that I was thinking would be like a bonus thing is to sort of prove that he worked at Barclays, he could actually pull out a business card and give it. Now, business cards don't mean anything, right? They're not, anyone can get a business card. And then the question is, he wouldn't know that she's at Barclays, right? But that's fine. He could have a business card of the 5 major banks, have them all ready to go. And when she says Barclays, he grabs the Barclays one and gives it to her, right? So he was obviously prepared to be an employee of any of the banks. Then you have the call center. So the office noise in the background added to the pretext. The way he talked to, it sounded kind of scripted, kind of like someone that's sort of bored that like does these calls all the day. He wasn't excited or anything like that. And then the automated system had some like tones and it sounded like a robot voice, even though it was one person's recording and things like that. Okay, so the pretext was believable. None of them were really that suspicious, right? So that worked. Okay, in terms of influence, so there's 2 things. So one is persuasion and one is elicitation. So what's the persuasion? What did you want her to do? Not what information? Okay, so taking the photo, so that's one. Okay, so this is a key one. They wanted them to use his cell phone, okay? Well, first off, her cell phone happened to be in the handbag, which was gone. So she didn't have the option of using a different phone. But if she'd used a different phone, would it have worked? No, because she would have called the real number, okay? If she had said, actually, there's a Barclays upstairs, I'm in a mall, I'll just go there, right? The attack wouldn't work either, okay? So getting her to use the phone right there was important. And then the tourist as well, distracting her, okay? And so the banker phone, it was just sort of like, here you go, it's right here. I can't remember, but I think there was some time sensitive, like you need to cancel your cards right away. It wasn't like, don't go home and do it like in a couple hours, like do it right away kind of thing. That sort of seed was planted. And then you have an option, it's right there, it's easy to do it. And then elicitation is what do you want to get? What's the information? So the PIN number obviously is it. And then it's also like what are the sort of circumstances that you create in order to make it easier to elicit that information, right? So it was kind of a stressful situation. So you're maybe not, if you're the victim, you're not thinking rationally, right? You're not thinking through everything. The time sensitive, you need to do it right away. That adds pressure. The fact that you have a phone and a bank person right there, all you have to do is talk and you can solve your problem, right? So it's an easy option. It's easy to take it. So all of those things kind of smooth the road to elicitation. The banker also, he was confident, sort of helpful. Also, if you didn't take his phone, it might be conceived as sort of insulting, right? Like, oh, I don't trust you. Maybe you're not a banker. I'm not going to take your phone, right? And so that as well. And then the automated system was also interested. So I don't know if you give your PIN to a robot as opposed to a human, does that make it feel more trustworthy? I guess it probably does. Now, the one thing he said, oh, I'm not allowed to take the PIN off of you. Okay. Now, that's a little bit dangerous because you are planting that seed of security in the person's mind, right? Now, all of a sudden, they're thinking, oh, yeah, my PIN, you're right, that is a secret. Like, should I even tell the bank, right? So it was a little dangerous in order to do that. We call that preloading. When you sometimes you use it to your advantage as a social engineer. You get someone thinking about something indirectly just through something you say or something that they read earlier in the day or things like that. Okay, so that's the one maybe nitpick of this attack is that maybe they shouldn't preloaded that idea. But anyways. Okay, so this framework fits pretty well. Okay, so now we'll go through each of I'll tell you a bit about each of them, and then I'll tell you lots of more stories about actual social engineering attacks. Okay, so the information gathering stage is, there's learning about the pretext. I didn't include it, but that's also part of the information stage, gathering stage, but it's mainly learning about the target. Okay, so you're going to target someone. It's usually not just say a company, it might be a specific person in the company, right? The security guard that is by the server room or the administrative assistant that's at the desk that you'll have to ask for to get access to something. Okay, and so the more you know about the company, who are the employees, what are their actual names, what are their positions, what's the org chart of people, that type of information could be useful. It could help you seem like you know what you're doing if you attack it. So adversaries will, they'll use LinkedIn, social media, company websites, so you can get a lot of information. They might also target interests, just they know that you're a fan of a sports team or something like that, and then they might make small conversation about the sports team or something like that, okay? So all of that type of stuff. There are some tools that help you. So there's one called Maltego that does a lot of the scraping for you. It gives you kind of a visual way of putting the information together and retaining it. You can also do slightly related is password profiling, which is if you're trying to brute force a password, what you can do is you can point it at, say, a website or a web domain and say, go through this company website and just pull out all the words that you see and then build a dictionary based on that, right? Because people might use a product name or something weird like that in their passwords. The tool doesn't know anything about the company or anything. It just sees words, and then it's building dictionaries based on the words that it sees, okay? But you might, some movie star or sports athlete or something like that, if I can point it at the right kind of domain that's somehow related to you, then maybe your password is sitting there or some variant of your password is sitting there in the words that are on this website. Another thing that's very useful information for social engineers is vacation plans. So vacation plans, why are they important? They're important because there's a disruption to the chain of command. So when someone goes on vacation, then someone else has to fill that position, okay? And that person may not know all the policies. They might not know all the procedures. They might not know who the common people are that come in. So let's say you're pretending to be an IT person, but you're not the normal IT person, right? So the person who does that job, 50 weeks of the year, they're going to know right away that you're not. Now, you can maybe get around that anyways by saying I'm filling in or that person's sick or something like that. But if the new person is there that's only there for a week or 2 weeks while that other person's on vacation, then you avoid that problem altogether, okay? Now, sometimes this can backfire as well, right? So sometimes that person will be sort of extra paranoid because it's not their normal job. And so they might, the other person might bend the rules a bit because they've been in the job for so long, but the new person comes in and they're very strict or things like that. So it could go either way, but vacation plans are something that people tend to broadcast on social media. And so it's information that's out there that you can get and use. And then any other kind of disruption that sort of changes the flow of things. So if the social engineer knows that there's construction that's being planned, then maybe there's some doors that are, just propped open that normally would have security access cards, right? Or a lot of traffic sort of through weird parts of the building that people would normally walk through, right? They walk right past the server room, but it'd be unusual normally for people to be in that hall or something like that, right? And then, emergencies, you pull the fire alarm and everyone evacuates, and what happens? What locks open? How do people get out of the building? That type of thing. How do the fire people go in? Those types of things could also be something that you exploit. Another thing you can look at is the stuff that gets thrown out by companies, okay? So companies throw out all sorts of paper, go through the paper, there's bills, there's IT stuff, there's names of contractors, subcontractors, documents, financial information, you name it, okay? Equipment, it could be an old computer, you pull the hard drive out and you find lots of stuff. There's all sorts of stuff. So this is like most companies have woken up to this particular attack. And so now there's secure shredding that's either done on site or you pay someone to come in. But then maybe your pretext is that you're the secure shredding company, right? And coming in, and then they hand you all the documents and you walk out saying thank you. But anyways, so these are all sort of different components that go into information gathering. Pretexting is impersonating someone that you aren't. The goal of pretexting, you don't achieve your goal just by doing a pretext, right? But what the pretext does is it gets you closer to the target, okay? So it's sort of a means to an end. So if someone believes your pretext, you're not done as a social engineer. It's just you've gotten into that proximity of what you actually want, and then you're going to use elicitation or persuasion to get what you actually want, okay? So here's some examples from a textbook on different things that you could use. So student, a temp worker, employee, internal IT support, or it could be external as well, a tourist, school teacher, girlfriend, boyfriend, fire warden, or inspector, so some sort of inspector that needs to do something, could get access to rooms that normally you wouldn't have access to, customer support, pest control, delivery person. You could say that you're from the ISP. You could be a potential customer, a supplier, remote worker, salesperson, journalist, recruiter, or cleaning staff, maintenance staff, or security staff as well. So these are some of the common things. So a pretext, what social engineers look at is they want to acquire some level of expertise. Obviously, if they're impersonating an IT person, they're not necessarily going to be an IT person, right? They're not going to know everything a real IT person knows, but they do want to gather some level of expertise, okay? And so I guess it's a question of how close they think they'll be scrutinized. But you could imagine you go in and you say, I need access to the server room for blah, 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 blah. And the person's like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll give it to you. But my computer's acting up. Can you fix it first? And then I'll let you in the server room, right? And so you have to be ready on the spot to actually do some real IT work or whatever it is, okay? And then there's a lot of confidence as well, right? So feeling like you are in control. Now, one thing to keep in mind psychologically is when people do social engineering attacks, they're lying and they're maintaining that lie. And it actually takes a lot of brain power to do that, okay? So it's cognitively, it's hard to do it, and you're spending a lot of time concentrating on the details of your lie, and that's less time to concentrate on what's being said in the conversation, or, say some information is actually disclosed, can I remember it, keeping all these things in mind, okay? So what social engineers do is they really plan out down to the conversation that they'll have. Okay, so beforehand, they'll be like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to ask this question. They're going to respond one of three ways. If they respond the first way, this is what I'm going to say. If they respond the second way, this is what I'm going to say, okay? So you can never predict a conversation, obviously, fully, but they're as much to the extent that you can predict it. They'll plan it out, they'll practice it first, having that conversation. They won't try to remember anything, they'll just record it, okay? So you'll have some sort of recording device that can't be seen, so you can always go back later and get it. And they'll pay really close attention to like the little small details. Like in the video, we saw the office noise in the background and things like that. If there was no office noise in the background, would that blown the whole thing? Probably not, okay? But it might just feel off, right? And there's a lot of things that our sort of subconscious picks up on that just kind of feel off. And then if it feels off, then maybe you start thinking skeptically or you start answering questions, okay? And so the idea, the social engineer will be like, they'll try to do everything they can so nothing feels off, right? So all sorts of little details. Okay, and then for influence, you have a specific outcome that you want. So it's either elicitation or persuasion. We'll deal with those separately. But once again, it's a lot of planning ahead, right? Thinking about contingency. So if something goes wrong, what do I do? What's the exit plan? So let's say that the person is skeptical and they're going to call the cops or something. How are you going to get out of there? Are you going to leave and then they're going to know for a fact that they were being scammed? Right? Or is there a way to leave like sort of without them being suspicious of you? So maybe it becomes clear to the social engineer that they're not going to get what they want, right? Can they at least remove themselves from the situation where the person isn't like, oh, I just got scammed? So an exit plan, and then good timing, like if you want to exploit some disruptions or things like that, how do you time when you do it? So the techniques for elicitation and persuasion kind of overlap, so you could probably use them for both, but I sort of roughly put them in two piles. So elicitation is you want some secret information from someone. So some techniques that might be helpful to an adversary would be building a rapport, as we call it. So like just being likable, friendly, telling jokes, making the person laugh, maybe flattery, appealing to their ego, that type of thing, complimenting them, some kind of mutual interest, right? So if you're like, you notice something on their desk and then you start talking about it, about their kids or about their favorite sports team or whatever it is. And maybe you did a whole bunch of research online so you know that that's real. And so that can also build a rapport. So that helps. The idea of preloading is kind of hard, but you could maybe, for example, if you want access to the server room to do an upgrade, you could maybe think about, could I preload that idea of a server upgrade is coming, maybe in a fake email that you send a week before, that looks like a company newsletter that mentions server upgrades or something like that, okay? It's really subtle, but it's sort of, the person might read it, they might skim it, it kind of plants the seed in their mind. Then when you come in, it's less of a surprise, okay? So that's the idea of preloading. Another thing that might work is sometimes you might actually say something that you know is wrong. And it's kind of human nature that if someone says something wrong, you want to correct them, right? So you're like, oh, the sales figure for the last quarter were blah, blah, blah. And then the person will be like, no, they weren't. They were like this or whatever, right? And so that might be a way of eliciting information. Another thing is if you do know stuff either from prior elicitation attacks on other people or from your information gathering stage, the more kind of secret information the social engineer knows, the more likely the person is to think that they're kind of safe to disclose information to. So if they already know tons of stuff about the company and how it works and things like that, then maybe you're not as tight-lipped around them when it comes to the things that you know as well. Yeah. Yeah, so the umbrella term we're calling influence. So influence is I'm trying to get you to do something. And then the difference is elicitation is just I want information from you. So if we go back to Stride, it's an information disclosure kind of attack, right? And persuasion is I want you to do something, right? So they are very close, and things like building a rapport is going to work both for elicitation and persuasion, right? So yeah, it's not so important to distinguish them, but things like misstating a fact, that's elicitation for sure because it's about getting a piece of information. It's not about getting them to do something. But does that make more sense? Yeah. Okay.
The example video you could say having the lady call is persuasion.
Yeah.
And getting the pin out of it, that could be elicitation.
Exactly. Yeah. So getting the pin was elicitation. Getting her to use your phone was persuasion. Okay, so persuasion wants the target to do something for them, whereas elicitation, the attacker wants secret information. So you can do all sorts of things. So empathy, like I've had a really bad day, you have a big long story, I'm really late for my job interview because I had all these problems and I have my CV, it's on a thumb drive, could you just print it off for me? I want to have a paper copy when I go in, right? So that's something you might say to an administrative assistant. If they take pity on you, then they might plug it in, print out your CV, and then of course it's loaded with malware or whatever. Indebtedness could be as well, like, oh, you dropped this, like now sort of I did you a it's not as explicit as that, like I did you a favor, now you do me a favor, but that's sort of the undertone to the conversation. By the way, would you print out my CV? Your boss is coming around the corner, you better close Facebook, by the way, that type of thing. A sales tactic that you'll learn over at the Molson School of Business is you can always ask for more than you actually want. And when the person says no, then you can maybe reach a sort of middle ground. So actually, I should move this over to elicitation. It's more of elicitation. But you could ask them to do a big thing for you. And when they don't want to do it, then you could say, well, could you just let me in the server room? I'll do it myself or whatever. But that's actually what you wanted all along. And then there's emotional manipulation as well. Okay, so fear, anger, coercion, anxiety, all those types of things. So like the stress of the pin thing definitely added to the scenario. So yeah. Now, if you're doing this as a pen tester and you're hired, this is like where the ethics come in, right? So a company's not going to hire you to go in and create like stressful circumstances for their employees to see what their employees will do under those stressful circumstances necessarily. Okay, so anyways, if you ever got a job as a social engineer, you want to think these things through. Okay, questions about the framework? No? Okay, so then I'll just tell you a couple stories. Okay, so the first story has to do with a company called RSA. RSA are actually like one of the biggest security companies. Okay, so the fact that this story happened with them is sort of embarrassing for the company. Every year they have this big expo conference called the RSA conference, and former presidents come and speak, and it's a big deal and things like that. Now, the flagship product of RSA, or one of them, definitely back 10 years ago, was this token that we talked about like at the beginning of class, but you might not remember it. So this is a two-factor authentication, okay? So what this is it's a dongle. You put it on your keychain, and every time you log in, you put your username, you put your password, and then you're going to put this digit in, and the digit also changes, okay? So there's two models. One model, you can increment it, so you press a button, you get a new code. The other is that it just updates every 10 minutes, okay? So let's just assume it updates every 10 minutes. Okay, so let's think about how it works first, and then I'll show you the attack itself. Okay, so it starts off like a normal interaction. So let's say Concordia is like, okay, we really care about this login security. We want two-factor authentication, which they now have. But instead of phones, we want all our employees to walk around with these RSA tokens, okay? So the start of it is just the same as a normal interaction. I still have a username, I still have a password, okay? So I send that to it. Concordia knows my password, or they have a hash of it, so they'll compare my password, they'll hash it and compare it to the hash of the password they have stored, and they'll decide whether the password is correct or not, okay? Then I'll be invited to enter the PIN, okay, or the code that's on this thing. Okay, so we assume that it updates every 10 minutes, and the idea of this is to protect against weak passwords or passwords that have been stolen, okay? So Concordia is like, well, there's a bunch of passwords out there and they get leaked, and someone's going to use their Concordia password on Indigo chapters, and then when chapters gets breached, which just happened, I just got an email about it actually, then the adversary is going to take the password from chapters and they're going to use it on Concordia, and they're going to break into the Concordia account, okay? So that's why we care about two-factor authentication. That's why it's better than just having username and passwords from a security perspective. right? We can go back to the evaluation framework to try and pick holes in why maybe Concordia wouldn't want to use it, probably because of usability and the cost of giving one of these to everyone. And the cost is actually interesting because it's expensive. They're not super expensive, but you have 10,000 people you want to give one to, it adds up, okay? For that reason, they were actually used in high security environments, okay? So two-factor is like more common now, but 10 years ago when this attack occurred, or 20 years ago, it wasn't that common. And so it's a lot of governments, military, like those are the types of organizations that would have these two-factor authentications. Okay. All right, so good. So now the user looks at their like little thing and they see the PIN and they type it in and they send it off to Concordia. Now Concordia's job is to figure out whether this number is correct or not, right? Are they actually holding the right token? And so there's different ways of setting it up, but the most common way of setting it up is Concordia will say, okay, that's not a question for us. That's a question for RSA, the company, okay? So we're a customer of RSA. So we're going to forward that information. We're going to say, okay, it's Carol. She's trying to log in, and this is the number that she's giving us. And what RSA have, they'll have a server basically that's set up in order to try and answer this question of whether it's right or not. Okay. Now the way the server works is a little weird, but I'll go through it. Okay. So the first thing the server does is it figures out. Okay, well, anyways, the server has to figure out if this number is right, okay? But the device itself is, miles away, right? It's in Canada and RSA is in the US, right? So it has no idea what's actually on the screen of this thing, okay? So what does it know? What it knows is that this device updates every 10 minutes, okay? And what it will do is it will program it so that when it updates, it's predictable what the next update will be. Okay? So there's a tool in cryptography we call a pseudo-random number generator. So it generates random looking numbers. You can't tell the difference between the numbers you get out of it and true random numbers. But the pseudo part is because it's deterministic. So there is an algorithm that's producing these numbers. And the algorithm starts with a number that's called the seed. Okay? So you have a seed. It's a truly random number. It's short. And once you have that seed, then the algorithm will expand that number into as many random numbers as you want. Okay? So you can do encryption that way. The seed can be the key, and you can just take your message and XOR it with the string of randomness that you get out of it. So that's called a stream cipher. But anyways, that's how it works. Okay. So RSA are going to need to know the seed because they have to figure out basically what's being shown on this device. I don't have physical access to it. So I gotta you could imagine they manufacture two devices, right? They give one to the user and they keep one, right? But then a human would have to go look at the device they have every time someone logs in, right? So you want that kind of idea, but you want it to be fully automated. You want a server to just do it, okay? So server is going to sit on the seed of every user. And RSA, they said, okay, we're going to put all our eggs in one basket. We're going to have one server. It's called the seed warehouse. And this is where all the seeds of all RSA users are sitting in a big table, okay? So when Concordia comes along, they say, okay, this is Carol. We authenticated them with the password, okay? I just want you to check the seed. What the server will do is they'll go and they'll grab this file, and they'll find Carol and they'll find her seed, okay? Now the next thing they have to figure out is how much time has passed since that device was manufactured, okay? So they'll manufacture all their devices or they'll configure them all in the factory or whatever. So they'll have that information and they'll say, that thing was manufactured 1 year ago, 3 months, 2 days, 7 hours, and 10 minutes ago. Okay? So that tells me how many steps I have to go. I have to advance the seed through this pseudo-random number generator to get what should currently be being shown. Okay? So that's what they'll do. Okay? So they'll figure out because this much time has passed and the seed updates every 10 minutes, this is the seed that should be appearing on the screen, okay? Now, there's always a chance that it's a bit off, right? Maybe the clock isn't perfect in the token or things like that. There's some slippage. So if you enter a code that's close to it, right? Like say it's just one code off or one code advance, they'll accept it and then they'll kind of adjust their time to keep things in synchronized, okay? So that's what they look at, okay? And then if everything works out, they'll figure out what the seat should be, and they'll say, okay, the seat should be 443853, and that's exactly what Concordia is telling us that the user entered, so we'll say that that's valid, okay? So they'll relay that information back to Concordia, and then Concordia will log the user in at that point. Okay, and the 1 year thing, it's instant. Like once you know the amount of time, you can instantly jump to that number. It's not like it takes a long time because you have to go through a year's worth of numbers. Like these algorithms are really fast. Okay, so you can just jump immediately to where you need to be. Okay, so RSA, like I say, they decided that we're just going to use one server to do this. And it's going to be for all of our customers. So all the governments, all the militaries, everyone that's using it, they have the option of setting up themselves. So Concordia could set up their own token server if they want, but most of the people just trust RSA because they're a security company, they should know what they're doing. And it's a pretty sensitive file, okay? If I get this file, then I can break two-factor authentication for every device, essentially, okay? Now, the other thing about this file is it needs to be a hot file, meaning that it needs to be online. Okay, it can't be a file that's in a safe that you go once a year and you go update or something like that. Because people are logging in all the time, you're getting millions of logins every second. You need to have access to that file. It's in RAM, so it's sitting on a server. It's connected to the internet because you have to pass that information back about whether people. It's not like a human's running through an air gap back and forth. You can't do login services that way, right? People expect that when you log in, it's instant. Okay, so this is a fully online server, and that makes it more vulnerable, right? Because it can be accessed technically from anywhere on the internet, although it will be well protected in the company's own infrastructure. All right, so an attacker wanted to get access to this file because they wanted to break all of two-factor authentication for RSA, and so they were able to do it. Okay, so it was very embarrassing for the company. They issued an apology, and it was all over the news articles about it. And it was particularly bad because you have all these devices and they cost money, right? And now they're all useless. Okay, so you have to go, and RSA is like, we'll replace them for free, don't worry. But still, it's a big logistical thing. They have to mail them out. It's not instant. Okay, so that's sort of the bad news. So they have high-profile clients, and it's expensive because it's a physical device. And you have to manufacture like basically a new device for all of your clients and things like that. So people were really angry about it, the customers of RSA. Now the good news though is you still have a password protecting the account, okay? So it wasn't necessarily like now the attacker can log into any account, okay? That said, a lot of passwords are weak or they might have been stolen, and maybe the user was less reluctant or more reluctant to change it because they have two-factor anyways, right? Or I'll just use a weak password because I have two-factor anyways, it's going to protect me, okay? So that might have worked against people choosing strong passwords, but the password was still protecting the accounts. Okay, so the question is, how did the attack happen? So we know some details, we don't know all of the details. I linked to RSA's own description of the attack on Moodle, and then there was a follow-up article in Wired magazine that was published about 10 years after the attack that goes into more detail about it. But basically, we know how the attack started. Okay, so this is the start of the attack. It all started with this email. I know it's kind of small. I'll try and make it bigger later, but I'll try and highlight the details of it. Okay, so it's an email. RSA is owned by another company called EMC. So their email of people that work there is at emc.com. And it kind of came from a weird domain. So the address came from webmaster@beyond.com. It didn't come internally. It didn't come from within the organization itself. I wanted to note that you can spoof email addresses to some extent, but there is a protocol, a cryptographic protocol that not everyone uses that would prevent it, called DKIM. So DKIM was probably, I imagine, in use. If it wasn't in use, they would have spoofed the email address. So that's probably why they didn't do it, okay? But the two in the CC were interesting. So they blurted out, but if you read the reports, they'll tell you descriptively who they were. So it was basically emailed to a set of people. All of them were real employees of RSA. They all worked on the same team. They were all in the HR department. It was in Australia, if I recall correctly. And they're the types of people that would normally be CC'd on an email together, okay? So there was nothing strange about it. It wasn't like it was just sent to random addresses or things like that, okay? And then the email content itself is really short. I forward the file to you for review. Please open it and view it. And so there's a file attachment. And the file attachment is called 2011, which is when it happened, recruitment plan dot XLS. So what's XLS? Excel file, okay. So it sounds like something, you work in HR, you get a recruitment plan, it's in an Excel file, right? That sounds pretty normal, okay. Now another question is it dangerous to open an Excel file? Like say it was malicious, worst case there was malware or stuff. Like, let me put it another way. Let's say I go to a website and there's a JPEG on the website. Is that a danger? Am I scared of JPEGs? Okay, we actually aren't generally scared of JPEGs. Why aren't we scared of JPEGs? So there is steganography that's sort of, forget about that. But why aren't we scared of getting a virus or malware from a JPEG? Okay. So the answer is it's passive content. We're just displaying it. It's not running code. Now there could be some vulnerability in the library that parses the JPEG. So that has happened. So there have been some passive files like that when you display them, it triggers something, but it's the specific software itself. Okay? But a JPEG doesn't run code itself. Okay? It's just passive content. Okay? And so things like JPEGs, whatever, they're fine. Now, if you get malicious JavaScript, right, that's different. That's code, right? Or if it was a .exe file, would you open that? No. Obviously not, right? That's an executable. Okay. So my question to you is Excel more like a .exe or is it more like a .jpg? Okay. All right. So the answer is sort of sitting here already on the slide, but for all their wisdom, Microsoft decided let's make spreadsheets really, really verbose and like be able to do lots of exciting things. Okay, so what you can do is you can program macros. You can use Microsoft's like VB script or whatever, and you can program things into a file. Now that's not so much dangerous. It's not like it's writing files to your computer and things like that. It's just kind of scripting. But there is that scripting capability. Okay. Then Microsoft said, you know what would be really cool? There's this thing called Adobe Flash. Adobe Flash was like kind of like it's executable code for web stuff that now has kind of fallen out of favor again. But anyways, they said it'd be really cool if you could have Flash inside your spreadsheets, right? You could have a cell and there'd be like a Flash script that's sitting there. So they added that capability, and that was like pretty dangerous because it opened up all sorts of attacks. And so in this particular email, these aren't amateur social engineers. It probably was a nation state, but it had a 0-day exploit. Okay, and so the exploit was actually in Flash. It wasn't in Excel itself. Excel was fine, but Excel allowed you to run Flash. And then Flash itself had a vulnerability in it, and nobody knew about it until like long after that it became a problem for RSA. So that's what I mean by 0-day. It wasn't an exploit that was out there and they found it and they said, oh, let's see if it works on RSA. It was like no one had seen it before. They were the only people that knew about it. Okay. All right. So let's say you click on this file and you open it up. What happens? So I can actually show you. Takes about a minute. It's kind of slow. So this is the email. And then you click on it. So Windows themselves tries to scare you, or Outbox tries to scare you away a bit by saying, oh, you're opening an attachment. You should only open attachments from a trustworthy source. Do you want to open it anyways? But anyways, most people, they're just going to click through. So if you click through, this is simulating what computers were like in 2011, how slow they were. And you just get an Excel file, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so there's basically nothing. You can see in the first cell, there's some like weird thing that's going on, and that's basically the malware that's being installed. And then that's it. Now you're infected. Congratulations. Okay. So what happened is someone clicked on it. Okay. One of the 3 people on that email actually clicked on it. And so the attacker was able to root that person's computer. Then what they did is once they had access to it, they said, okay, this is an HR person. Maybe they have like, you know how like sometimes you join a company and they give you your username or password, right? Maybe that's in a file. Maybe they have a file of username, passwords, that type of thing. We also know their username password now because we just wait for them to type it in a few times and we keystroke log it. And so we can go around to other computers in the network and see if we can type that username password into it, all virtually, right, remotely. And so that's what happened. So basically they moved sort of from computer to computer. They tried all the computers with that credential and they searched all those computers for more credentials. They found some other credentials stored, then they would repeat it. They would try all the computers they could see with all the credentials they know. They would get a few more computers. And the write-ups, like people wrote about the attack. They didn't go through all the details, and RSA themselves might not know exactly. But eventually, the adversary was able to move laterally through it, and they got the admin email for the person that had access to the server that had all the seeds in it. Okay? So they eventually gained access to it. Then what they had to do is you say, okay, game over, right? But they actually have to get the data out, okay? Because it's sitting on the computer, right? And it's a lot, I know they're short like seeds, right? But there's a lot of them, okay? So it's not that small of data, okay? And so how do you get it out? Like you could email it to yourself, right? But then when they go in their logs, they're going to see that outbound email. Right, they're going to say, A, that looks suspicious. B, you're leaving a trace of who you are. And C, they might have like network intrusion detections and things like that where, you know, a server that normally wouldn't have an outbound connection all of a sudden does, and it's dumping gigabytes of data, right? Then it might the system might just turn it off even though it doesn't know what's going on just as a precaution, right? So what they did is they very slowly trickled it out over 9 hours. They dropped it on a server that was Rackspace, which is just a cloud provider. And then I forget how it worked. Somehow I forget how they got access, but anyways, one of the IT people, eventually they realized the attack had happened at RSA. And so they went over to that server and somehow they were able to log into it. I guess in order for the database to write into the server, the username password had to be on the database, right? So the attacker left the username and password for the account on the server so it would be able to write into the server. So they found it on the computer. They logged into the server, and when they logged in, they saw the files were still there. And so they hit delete, and then when they hit delete, it said, oh, we can't delete that file. It's already deleted. And then they realized that the attacker, like literally 1 second before, had like pulled the data off of that database. And so they missed it. If they had been 5 seconds earlier and deleted it, maybe they would have stopped it there. But anyways, from there, they couldn't trace it much beyond that. So to this day, they don't know exactly for sure who did it. There's some speculation in the article about different people that might have done it, but no one knows for sure. Okay, but anyways, the whole story started with a social engineering attack. In this case, we call it spear phishing because it was targeted very specifically at actual employees at the company. You could imagine the information gathering that went in to make that email plausible, send it to the right people so that you have a chance of having them actually open it. And then because you have that 0 day, there's also a chance. So how do we know about the email? So that video I showed you is from F-Secure. And F-Secure have this like malware detection thing. Like they have antivirus software and things like that. And so the reason they got the email is that actually the RSA automatically uploaded all their email for virus detection. Okay. Now they didn't do it fast enough, or F-Secure weren't able to detect the malware in that file because it was a 0 day. Okay. But then later, the 0 day became known, right? And so F-Secure updated their software, and then they realized, oh, hey, we have this email from like a couple months ago that was at RSA, and it has this malware that we just found out about today. And then they realized that this must be the email that like started the whole attack. So that's how the story kind of got pieced together.
So it's like a Trojan horse, right?
Yeah, you can think of it, a Trojan horse, yeah. Okay, let me tell you one more story and then we'll break. Okay, so this story concerns a guy named Matt Honan. So Matt Honan is a reporter for Wired magazine. He wrote an article about what I'm going to describe, so that's how we know the details of it. And there's a link to the article itself from Moodle if you want to read it. Okay, I copied these slides from elsewhere, so let me actually see if I can probably fix it faster than anything else. I'm giving away some of the story, so don't avert your eyes. Okay, I'll fix it better later, but this should at least be readable. Okay, so here's the story. It's really simple. Matt was a Twitter user, and he had a very short Twitter handle. Okay, 3 characters @MAT. Now Twitter doesn't care if you @reply someone, their username doesn't count. But before it counted against your character. So you had 140 characters, including the username. So small usernames were thought to be valuable, and they were coveted by people. So someone woke up one day and decided, hey, I really like Matt's Twitter name, so I'm going to try and get it. All right. Now they don't know his password, right? So what would you do if you don't know the password, but you want the Twitter handle anyways? All right, so I forgot my password. I'm Matt Honan. I forgot my password. I want to reset it. All right, so that's what the adversary did. And Twitter said, okay, great. We'll reset your password for you. We actually have a recovery email address on file. It's at Gmail. And so you can, we'll send a link, and if you can click on the link in the email, then we'll reset your password, okay? Now, the adversary doesn't have access to Matt Honan's email address either, obviously, so what do you do?
Other options.
Sorry?
Other options.
Okay.
Then they put other options for phone.
Okay, so you could look at Twitter to see if there's any other kind of recovery. Let's say that this is the only option.
Try to get that.
Okay, so then we go over to Google and we do the exact same thing, right? Just see what happens anyways. So we go to Google and we say, hi, I'm Matt Honan. It probably said the Gmail address, so I know the username, or maybe it was well published. And I want to reset my password. And Google said more or less the same thing. They said, great, we're happy to reset your password. We actually have another email address on file for you. And so we're going to send it to your me address. What's me? Anyone know? So it's the recovery email address, but the domain is @me.com. Does anyone know what @me or who owned @me.com? Okay, so me.com was maybe, I don't know, say 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Apple decided they want to have a Facebook, right? They were jealous of Facebook, so they wanted to do their own social network. And so for a short time, they had this like me network, me.com. And then, of course, the reason no one's heard of it, like not even did you not use it, you haven't even heard of it, is it was a huge flop, right? Okay. But anyways, so we're going to go over to Apple and we're going to say, okay, I'm Matt Honan @me.com or whatever, and I want to reset my password. Okay. Now this is where the story slightly changes. At this point in time, Twitter and Google, they weren't really selling you anything. Okay. They were just services they were free to use. Okay. But Apple was different. They had music, iTunes and things like that. They were selling things. You could buy computers and things like that. And so they had credit card information on file, okay? So for resetting a password, they said, that's fine. You can reset your password. I want your username, I want your billing address, and I want the last 4 digits of your credit card, all right? So the adversary is like, okay, let's see what we can do. So username we know because it was in the email recovery. What about the billing address? Now what they realized is that Matt Honan had his own personal domain name. And there's this directory called the whois directory. And you can say who owns matthonan.com. And for the longest time, people would put their real names and addresses there. Now it's not so much like there's all these, like when you buy something, a domain, Like they basically, you have to pay a little extra, but there's this privacy card and everyone uses it, okay? But for a long time, people's real addresses who owned websites would be sitting there in a public directory. So they pulled his address off, so that's fine, but they didn't have the last 4 digits of the credit card, okay? So they were stuck. All right, so then what they said is, let's just play around a bit. Let's go over to Amazon. I wonder if he has an account at Amazon, okay? So they go over to Amazon. Sorry, the font's getting messed up. And Amazon, they say, okay, I'm at Honan. I don't have access to my Amazon. Can you reset my password? And Amazon basically says the same thing as Apple. What's your username? What's your billing address? And what's the last 4 digits of your credit card? And so now they're stuck, okay? And this is where they have a brilliant idea. You can't really see it, but this is what they decide to do. They decide, hey, instead of doing this whole through the web thing, I'm gonna call them up. Okay, so they call them up, and they say, I'm Matt Honan. I didn't lose my password. That's not the issue here. Okay, I'm Matt Honan, and I have a new credit card, and I want to add it to my account. And the Amazon person said, great, we love new credit cards, right? You want to buy stuff? That's fine. We don't care who you are. Maybe you're not Matt Honan. Who cares? Then you add someone else's credit card to your account and start buying stuff, right? That's not our problem. That's good for us, okay? So they added the account without really authenticating him. And he said, thank you very much, hung up, right? Then he called back and said, hi, I'm Matt Honan. I forgot my password. Okay, so they said, okay, great. What's your account username? They knew it. What's the billing address? And what's the last 4 digits of your credit card? Well, I don't know the original one, but I just added a credit card and I know the last 4 digits of that, right? And so they said, here's my last 4 digits of the second credit card. And Amazon said, great, you must be Matt Honan, and we're going to reset your password for you. Okay, so they got in. And then once they were in, they could see, they could go into manage my credit cards, and then they could see all the credit cards that were there. And it didn't show them all. It starred them all out, but it showed the last 4 digits. Okay, so then they went back to Apple and said, okay, now I know the last 4 digits. And then they reset the Apple password, which got them the email so they could reset the Google password. And then that got them the email that could reset the Twitter password, and they got the Twitter username. Okay, now give me 2 more minutes and I'll just complete the story. So they took over Twitter. That was their goal. Okay, and I mean, that's fine. It would have been kind of a nuisance for Matt Honan to lose his Twitter, but he would start with a new one. The bigger problem was the attacker wanted to cover their steps as well. Okay, so every time they went up the chain, they didn't just reset passwords, they deleted stuff. Okay, so for example, when they got into Gmail, they wiped out his inbox. Okay, now imagine your email just gets wiped out, and he's a reporter, so he has all sorts of, all his contacts, stories he was working on, drafts, all that stuff is gone. Okay, so that's very disruptive, right? Then as they went through Apple, they said, okay, what can we delete? And Apple has this thing where if you lose your phone, first off, it will find it for you, right? Find my iPhone. And then if you're really scared that it's lost for good and you don't want someone to get access to it, there's a remote erase feature, okay? So I can securely erase my phone, all right? So that's what the adversary did. He wiped his phone and his iPad, and that's actually how he got caught on to the attack. He picked up his iPad and it was wiped, okay? Then he tried to get his email and his emails weren't working, or I don't know if he changed the password necessarily. I can't remember the exact details. You can remember it or read it. But anyways, eventually he realized the extent to which that he was hacked. And he messaged him on Twitter because he took over his account. And then the person agreed to tell him how he did the attack. So that's how we know the details of it. Okay. And then the one final thing is that Apple, they love this secure remote wipe feature. Okay, they loved it a lot. And so they said for a short period of time, you could actually do it on laptops as well. All right. So what the adversary did is as they went through, they wiped his laptop remotely. And now he lost everything. He lost all his files. He had pictures of his kids and his wedding and all these irreplaceable things, all of it gone in an instant. Just because someone wanted his Twitter name and they wanted to cover their attacks, right? Now, as a response to this, Amazon changed their policy, so you can't do this anymore. Apple took the remote wipe thing off of, at least it was on by default, right? So you opted in. Now I think it's either completely gone or you have to jump through some hoops to turn it on. It's not like on by default for laptops. For phones, I think it's still on for default. So and then a lot of companies went back through their policies and they look for loopholes like this, like adding in a credit account and then resetting a password. That was a loophole. So this is in Stride, we would call it an escalation of privilege attack. And so they all went through looking for this, but then it's really hard to analyze a policy, right? Like if someone calls me and asks for this, I do this, but if they, it's not like math or code or things like that. It's hard to automate how you would analyze it and things like that. So anyways, that's where we are today. And I have about 4 or 5 other social engineering stories that I'll share with you next class.